Hey everyone, welcome back to our series on the books of the Bible. And today we're going to be talking about 2 Kings. And as we talked about 1 Kings, we mentioned it's literally just the book of the Kings, and this here is the second part of it. When we look back to the Hebrew Bible, the books of 1 and 2 Kings were not divided, but they were literally just a singular book. And this becomes very obvious when we start to look at the end of 1 Kings and its transition into the book of 2 Kings. Because it really splits a man's reign in two. It's a very strange division that we have. When we look, it splits the reign of a man named Ahaziah. In 1 Kings chapter 22 and verse 51, nearing the end of that book, it talks about the reign of a man named Ahaziah. It says, Ahaziah, the son of Ahab, began to reign over Israel and Samaria in the 17th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah. And he reigned 2 years over Israel. Then it talks a little bit more about the way that he reigned, how he was one who served false gods. And then as we jump to the very beginning of 2 Kings chapter 1 and verse 1, it says, after the death of Ahab, which was Ahaziah's father, Moab rebelled against Israel. Now Ahaziah fell through the lattice of his upper chamber in Samaria and lay sick. So he sent messengers telling them, go, inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron, whether I shall recover from this sickness. When we look at this split between 1 and 2 Kings really divides up the reign of Ahaziah. In 1 Kings, it says, now Ahaziah began to reign, and he was a bad king. He served the Baals, he served the false gods. And then we start 2 Kings, and he fell through his lattice is kind of where we get to. So understanding this, we get the knowledge that 1 and 2 Kings are meant to be a continuous history of the kings that served in Israel and over God's people, both the northern and the southern kingdom. So going back to 1 Kings, we remember that we saw the first few kings are actually the second king. We saw the end of David's reign, and we saw the death of David, and we saw him being followed up by his son Solomon, who was a very, very wise man because that was what he asked for from God. But then we saw the division of the kingdom. We saw how Solomon's sons, Jeroboam and Rehoboam, well, his son Rehoboam and the other man, Jeroboam, how they split the kingdom. There was this division of it. And after this, we see that there are two separate kingdoms. And we have to remember this. As we go forward, we have to notice if the Bible talks about Israel, it is talking about the northern kingdom. And if it talks about Judah, it is talking about the southern kingdom. So as you read the books of 1 and 2 Kings, go through and it'll say, so-and-so was the king of Israel, or so-and-so was the king of Judah. And it tells us what kingdom they were the king over. So that is a very important bit of information for us to have. So as we jump into 2 Kings, we see this as the continuation of it. We're going to learn about the kings of both the northern and the southern kingdom, the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah. And as we go through, generally speaking, we are going to be quickly introduced to someone. And for the sake of time, we're not really going to dive into many of these kings, but that's what I hope that you will hope to or want to study, is to learn about these men, learn about the kings of these places. But for the most part, it'll dive in. It'll say, and so became the king of either Judah or Israel. And he reigned for this many years, and it'll usually give us a number of things that he did. It'll tell us a story or two of the things that happened while he was the king. Then it'll usually tell us whether he served God or he served the false gods, whether he was righteous or whether he was wicked. It'll tell about his military victories or his military conquests. And then it says, and he died, and another king comes. This is pretty much the story, the way that we see the book of 2 Kings going. It is just a historical recounting of these kings, whether or not they were a good king, where they served, where they were the king of, and a couple of the things that they did. Now, another very important thing for us to notice is that through the entirety of these kings of the divided kingdom, In the southern kingdom, or Judah, there were only a handful of good kings. A handful of kings that actually served God, that tore down the things that had been offered to the idols, that tore down the places that the idols would be worshiped, and that brought Israel back to serve the one true God. And in the northern kingdom, or Israel, we never see another good king serving there. They were all given to idolatry. They were all given to these false gods, even though on a number of occasions some of them may have called upon God to deliver them from some wickedness. So as we go through, one of the most important things that we see in the book of 2 Kings is the carrying away to captivity. And if we remember, going back to the ideas of the good and the bad kings, the first group of the people that gets carried out is the northern kingdom, or the Israel, or Israel as we see it referred to. If you look over to 2 Kings chapter 17, verses 6 through 8, it says, "In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria, and he carried the Israelites away to Assyria, and he placed them in Halah, and on the harbor, the river of Gozan, in the cities of Medes, and this occurred because the people of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up out of the land of Egypt from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and had feared other gods and walked in the customs of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel, and in the customs that the kings of Israel had practiced." When we look here, we see that this is the carrying out of. They were basically taken into captivity. The northern kingdom was taken by Assyria. Then as we jump to the end of 2 Kings in chapter 25, we see that the same thing happens to the southern kingdom. They were taken by Nebuchadnezzar. So we see that both of them, because of their wickedness, as it was laid out for us there in 2 Kings chapter 17, because they had turned away from God, because they had gone after these false gods, they were carried into captivity. This is going to be a very important and a very pivotal part of the rest of the Bible. As we start to look at the prophets, as we move on from the books of the Kings and so on, we're going to see that a lot of the things that the prophets talked about has to deal with the captivity. They were either warning about the captivity, telling them that they had to turn and go back to God, or else they would be taken away. Some of the prophets talked to the Israelites while they were in captivity, and then some of the prophets were talking to the Israelites, or Judah, as they returned from captivity. In the book of 2 Kings, we get a historical account of many of the kings that God had placed over both Israel and Judah. We see that because of their lack of faithfulness, because of their desire to serve false gods, they were ultimately taken away from the land that God had promised. They were taken away from the place that they were and were stripped of their power and basically of having a nation whatsoever. The books of 1st and 2nd Kings are very pivotal in the history of the Bible. And in them, I hope you get a desire to study them, because there are many great stories of God's people, of God's might on the few kings that were faithful unto him. But there is one final passage that I want us to look at, and this is 2 Kings chapter 5. 2 Kings chapter 5, and starting in verse 9, we see the story of a man named Naaman. And Naaman is a righteous, or a king in some sense. And it says, "So it was, when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, and that he had sent the king, saying, 'Why have you torn your clothes? Please let him come, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel.'" Verse 9, "Then Naaman went with his horses and chariot, and he stood at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, 'Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored to you, and you shall be clean.' But Naaman became furious, and he went away and said, 'Indeed, I said to myself, he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, and wave his hand over the place and heal the leprosy. Are not the Abana and the Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel?' Could I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went away in a rage. And his servants came near and spoke to him, and said, My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then, when he says to you, Wash and be clean? So he went down, and he dipped 7 times in the Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. Here we see the story of Naaman, a man who was leprous, and this is the background of it. And he goes to Elisha, the prophet of God, and he says, I want to be clean. He says, Elisha's going to be able to heal me, and Elisha doesn't really come out to him. He says, go dip in the Jordan 7 times. And notice what Naaman's reaction was. Well, why'd you tell me to do that? There's better rivers in Damascus. Why'd I come all this way to talk to Elisha? I figured that he would do some great thing. He would come out and he would wave his hands and he would show some great sign and I would be healed from my leprosy. Notice what Naaman wanted was something great. He wanted some amazing sign that would be an extravagant sign to him. But instead, Elisha just told him, go and dip in the river. And he was upset about this. His servants then go to him and say, well, if he had said to do something great, you would have done it in a heartbeat. Why won't you do something that is simple? When we look to God's word and the things that God wants us to do as his people, a lot of times they don't always make sense to us. A lot of times we expect that God's going to do some great or miraculous thing when in reality he has made it something that is very simple for his people to do. When we look to God's commandments to us, we can't neglect the things that God has said just because we think that they are inconsequential or that they are small. God has made his commandments fairly easy for us to follow. We can't expect something great. Thank you all for watching with us and listening with us as we've looked at the book of 2 Kings. I hope that this has been something that is beneficial to us. The book of 2 Kings is an amazing book to study that gives us a great bit of information and history to the Israelite people. So hopefully you will go and you will look at it a little bit more in the future and study it for yourself. But thank you all so much for watching. We'll see you next week.